A billionaire walked in and saw his father on the floor barking, with a maid holding a rope tied to his neck. What the billionaire did next was terrible. "What is going on in here?" Jonathan Blake's voice boomed through the huge marble hall. Outside, rain beat hard against the glass doors and lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the family's giant mansion. "Dad, why are you on the floor making dog sounds?" His voice was filled with both anger and fear. The sight in front of him was something he could never imagine. His 82-year-old father, Edward Blake, one of the most famous billionaires in the city, was crawling on his hands and knees. He was barking with a rough voice like a very scared dog. A rope was hanging loosely from his neck. Holding the other end of the rope was Elena Carter, the young maid. She was on her knees shaking, her uniform wet with sweat and tears. "Mr. Blake, please," she cried, her hands fumbling to loosen the knot. "He couldn't breathe when I found him. I was just trying to—" "Trying to what?" Jonathan yelled, marching toward her as rainwater dripped from his expensive coat. "Trying to make fun of him?" Before Elena could answer, a sharp voice called down from the staircase, "She's hurting him again." It was Victoria, Jonathan's wife, holding the railing with shaking hands. "I told you she was a bad person, Jonathan. She's obsessed with your father." "That's not true," Elena sobbed, shaking her head wildly. "He was scared. He thought someone was chasing him. I promise I was only trying to help him calm down." "Be quiet," Victoria screamed, her voice mean and cold. "Don't you dare speak to me." She then threw her wine glass down the stairs, and it shattered across the shiny floor. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He kneeled beside his father. "Dad, can you hear me? It's me." Edward's eyes looked around wildly, and tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks. "The rope," he gasped weakly. "The rope." Jonathan turned to Elena, his eyes burning with fury. "You did this to him?" "I didn't," she cried, shaking all over. "Please, you have to believe me. Your father, he tied it himself." He was confused. But Jonathan's anger exploded before he could think. His hand came down hard across her face. The crack echoed loudly in the hall. Elena stumbled backward, a red mark appearing on her cheek, her eyes wide with pure shock. "I never hurt him," she whispered through her tears. "I saved him." Jonathan pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "Get out of my house, now." Elena froze. She looked at the old man one last time, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blake," before running out into the storm. Victoria came down the stairs slowly, a cold smile on her face. She touched Jonathan's arm gently. "You did what you had to do," she whispered. "That girl doesn't belong here." Jonathan didn't answer. He just stood in the middle of the floor, staring at the broken glass, the coiled rope, and his father, who was crying softly, looking completely lost and broken. The big storm had passed, but the giant Blake mansion felt haunted by what happened that night. This house, once a proud home for a billionaire family, now felt as quiet and sad as a graveyard. Jonathan sat all alone in his large office. The only light came from a small lamp on his desk, shining on a pile of papers he hadn't even looked at. His fancy shirt was unbuttoned and his tie was thrown on a chair. He was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. The sound of his father's barking and scared cries played over and over in his head. A clock on the wall ticked softly. It was after 3 in the morning. Down the long hall he could hear the quiet sounds of servants cleaning up the broken wine glass. Their soft whispers traveled through the empty house. "Did you see the look on her face?" one maid whispered. "She didn't even try to defend herself," another one answered. "Miss Elena wouldn't hurt anyone." Jonathan pushed the palms of his hands against his head. "Stop," he whispered to himself. But the voices wouldn't go away. The sound of his own hand, hitting Elena's face the way she looked so shocked and hurt, burned inside him. He got up and walked to the big window. Outside, the driveway was shiny and wet from the rain. Victoria's reflection suddenly appeared in the glass behind him. She was standing there silently, holding a glass of wine even though it was the middle of the night. "You can't blame yourself," she said in a soft voice. "Your father has been getting worse for months. He probably attacked her first, Jonathan. You were just protecting him." He turned to look at her. "I saw what I saw. He had a rope around his neck." She just shrugged, a cold little smile on her lips. "And you saw who was holding it." Jonathan wanted to argue, but he felt confused. He knew his father's mind was getting weaker, but now he wasn't so sure about what he saw. "Something just feels wrong," he muttered, looking past her. Victoria's voice became even softer, like honey mixed with poison. "Then stop thinking about it so much. You did what any good son would do." She walked away, leaving the smell of her expensive perfume behind. Jonathan sat back down at his desk and stared at the big family painting on the wall. It showed his father looking strong, his mother with a kind smile, and himself looking young and confident. Now the whole painting looked like a lie. He leaned forward and whispered to himself, "If I was wrong, if I punished an innocent person, how can I ever forgive myself?" He looked up, his eyes tired but with a new strong feeling inside them. "No," he said quietly. "Something isn't right here. I have to find out the truth." The next morning, the mansion was quiet again, but it was a fake calm. The marble floors were clean, the shiny lights hung from the ceiling, and the only sign of last night's trouble was a very faint wine stain on the floor near the stairs. In the kitchen, the servants were whispering as they made breakfast. Two maids, Marjorie and Clara, kept looking at the back door as if they expected Elena to walk in at any moment. "She didn't even take any of her things," Marjorie whispered. Her old hands were shaking as she put toast on a plate. "She just ran out into the rain with no shoes on." "I hope she's okay." Clara bit her lip. "You saw how Mr. Jonathan hit her. She didn't even fight. She just kept saying she didn't do it." Marjorie leaned in closer. "That's because she didn't," she whispered. "I've worked for that woman," she said, nodding her head toward the stairs where they could hear Victoria walking around. "And I know when she's lying. Mrs. Blake's smile can hide a lot of bad things." The kitchen door opened and Henry, the old gardener, walked in. He had worked for the family for 40 years. "You two should be quiet before she hears you," he said in a low voice. Clara looked at him. "You were outside last night, weren't you, Henry? Did you see anything?" Henry paused, looking out the window. "I saw more than I wanted to," he said softly. The two maids looked at each other nervously. Henry leaned in. "Mr. Edward wasn't just barking for no reason. His mind isn't gone like they say. He was scared. Really scared. And that girl, she was trying to help him. I saw her trying to get that rope off him." Marjorie's eyes got wide. "Then why didn't you say something?" Henry's face got tight. "Because I've seen what happens to people who get in Mrs. Blake's way." He looked toward the stairs where Victoria's laugh could now be heard. "But maybe I've been quiet for too long." Just then the kitchen door swung open. The butler, Stephen, rushed in. "Quiet," he hissed. "She's coming down." They all quickly went back to work just as Victoria walked in. She was wearing a perfect white dress and holding a coffee cup like a queen. She smiled. But it was the kind of smile that made everyone feel sick. "Good morning," she said sweetly. "Is everything clean? Reporters might call today." "Yes, ma'am," Clara mumbled, looking down at the floor. Victoria took a sip of her coffee. "Oh, and if any of you hear from our old maid, tell her not to come back. We will mail her final pay." She walked out, the sound of her high heels clicking on the floor. After she left, the kitchen was heavy with silence. Henry stared after her, his hands shaking a little. He muttered under his breath, so quiet that only he could hear. "That's it. Enough is enough." Then he turned and walked toward the security room, a room that only a few people were allowed to enter, and closed the door behind him. The next day, the big house felt even colder. Jonathan Blake slowly opened the door to his father's bedroom. The curtains were closed and only thin lines of gray light came into the room. Machines beeped quietly next to the bed, keeping track of the old man's weak heartbeat. "Dad?" Jonathan whispered. Edward Blake was lying very still. His hands, which used to be so strong, were now shaking on the white bedsheets. His eyes slowly opened. They were cloudy, but he seemed to know who was there. "Jonathan," he said, his voice very weak. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed. "It's me, Dad. You're safe now." Edward's lips trembled. He whispered, "The rope." "The rope." Jonathan leaned closer. "What about it, Dad?" "She saved me," Edward whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "The girl? She saved me." Jonathan froze. "Elena?" His father nodded slowly and weakly before closing his eyes and falling back asleep. Jonathan just sat there, not moving. His father's words hung in the air, confusing and heavy. He stood up and ran a hand through his hair. "Saved him?" he whispered. No, he must be confused. But a small seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. He left the room and walked down the hall to the security office. It was a small room with no windows, filled with TV screens. The head of security, a man named Malcolm, was typing on a computer. "I want to see the video from last night," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "Show me everything from the main hall between 9 and midnight. Malcolm looked up, surprised. He hesitated. "Well, that's the problem, sir. The video, it's gone," Jonathan frowned. "Gone? What do you mean?" "Yes, sir. It looks like someone deleted it. The computer shows that someone manually erased it at around 9:42 last night." Jonathan stepped closer. "Who can do that?" "Who has access?" "Only 3 people, sir," Malcolm said. "You, me, and Mrs. Blake." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the computers. Jonathan's jaw felt tight. "Try to get it back," he ordered. "I'll try my best, sir," Malcolm said nervously. But whoever did this knew what they were doing. Jonathan left the room, his heart pounding. As he walked down the hall, he could hear Victoria laughing in the sunroom. It was a loud, happy sound that felt completely wrong. He stopped at the door and saw her sipping orange juice with a friend, talking as if nothing bad had happened at all. "Good morning, darling," she said with her perfect, cold smile. "Did you get any sleep?" Jonathan just stared at her, looking for any sign of guilt in her eyes. But he saw nothing. "No," he said coldly. "I didn't sleep at all." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor. Back in his room, his father stirred in his sleep, whispering to the empty room, "She saved me. She saved me." And in that moment, Jonathan knew that something about that night was terribly wrong. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Jonathan sat at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The words, "She saved me," kept repeating in his head. The door behind him opened. It was Henry, the gardener. He was holding his hat in his hands and looked nervous. "Sir, can I talk to you for a minute?" Jonathan looked up. "Make it fast, Henry." "Not here, sir." "Somewhere private, please." They went outside to the garden. The morning sun was shining on the wet rose bushes. Henry's hands were shaking as he spoke. "Sir, I can't be quiet anymore. I saw what happened that night." Jonathan's heart stopped. "You what?" Henry's eyes filled with tears. "I was working by the windows. I saw Mr. Edward through the glass. He was crying and struggling. Miss Elena was there, but she wasn't hurting him, sir. She was trying to help him." Jonathan frowned. "Helping him? With a rope around his neck?" Henry nodded sadly. "Your wife, sir, Mrs. Blake. She put the rope there first." Jonathan felt like he had been punched. What are you saying? Henry pulled a small USB drive from his pocket, his hand trembling. I shouldn't have done this, but I copied a part of the security video from another screen before it was all deleted. Jonathan held his breath as Henry continued. Mrs. Blake went into Mr. Edwards' room with a glass of whiskey. I saw her pour some drops into it first. What kind of drops? Jonathan demanded. I don't know, sir. Then she told the maid to get a rope. She said it was for a game to teach him a lesson. I thought it was some kind of sick joke until I heard her laughing. Henry took a deep breath, his voice cracking. She said, if the old man doesn't bark, I'll tighten the rope myself. He needs to learn his place. Jonathan's face went pale. No, that's not possible. Henry put the USB drive into his phone and pressed play. A recording started, and through the static, Jonathan could hear Victoria's cold, clear voice. If he doesn't bark, I'll tighten it myself. Jonathan stumbled backward. The recording continued with the sounds of his father coughing, Elena screaming for someone to help, and Victoria's cruel laugh in the background. When it was over, Jonathan just stood there shaking. Henry spoke quietly. She's been putting things in his medicine too. Drugs that make him confused. That's why he's been getting so much worse. Jonathan's voice was just a whisper. You mean, my wife has been poisoning my father? Henry nodded slowly. Every night, sir. Jonathan's face filled with horror and then pure rage. He looked back at the giant mansion, the home his father had built, now poisoned by lies. Henry, he said, his voice shaking with anger. Don't say a word of this to anyone. Not yet. The old gardener nodded. Jonathan looked up at the house. She thinks she buried the truth, he whispered. But she just woke it up. That evening the house was quiet. Jonathan Blake walked up the main staircase, feeling the weight of the world with every step. In his hand he held the USB drive from Henry. His father's words, "She saved me," and Victoria's evil laugh from the recording echoed in his mind. He reached their bedroom door. It was slightly open, and he could see candlelight flickering inside. Victoria was sitting at her mirror, brushing her long golden hair. She saw his reflection in the mirror and smiled. Jonathan, darling, she said softly, you've been so serious all day. You need to rest. He walked in and closed the door behind him with a loud click. I just saw Dad. Her hand stopped brushing her hair. How is he? He's alive, Jonathan said. Barely. Victoria turned around, pretending to be worried. Oh, darling, I told you his mind is going. Stop the act, Victoria, he said, his voice like thunder. He threw the USB drive onto her table. Explain this. She looked at it, acting confused. What is that? It's your voice, he hissed, laughing while my father was begging for his life. Victoria's smile finally disappeared. Jonathan, what are you talking about? I heard you, Victoria. If he doesn't bark, I'll tighten it myself. What kind of monster does that to an old man? She stood up, her fake mask falling away. You don't understand. Oh, I understand everything, he yelled. Henry saw you put something in his drink. You've been drugging him, making him sick. And when Elena tried to stop you, you blamed her. Her face turned hard and mean. You can't prove anything. Jonathan's voice became dangerously quiet. I have all the proof I need. He walked to her dresser, pulled open a drawer, and found them. 3 medicine bottles with the labels scratched off. He could just barely read the name of the drug. It was a powerful drug used to make confused people calm and obedient. Victoria's face was now completely white. Jonathan, listen to me. No, you listen to me, he said, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with fire. You almost killed my father. You made me hurt an innocent woman. You made me think you were the one who was scared. She took a step back. And who do you think people will believe? She asked, her voice shaking but still arrogant. An old confused man and a poor maid? Or me, your wife? Jonathan stepped closer until he was right in front of her. Not anymore. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Security, he said coldly. Pack Mrs. Blake's bags. She's leaving tonight. Victoria stared at him in shock. You can't do this. I already have, he said. And if you make a scene, I will give this recording to every news station in the city. For the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Jonathan leaned in close, his voice shaking with anger and sadness. You wanted to destroy this family. Well, congratulations, Victoria. You did it. He turned and walked out of the room. The flickering candlelight showed the real woman behind the mask. Not a beautiful queen, but a broken liar who had finally been caught. Later that night, the rain started again. Jonathan drove his big black car through the wet city streets looking for Elena. He called every number he had for her, checked with old friends, and went to every address he could find. Finally, Henry, the gardener, handed him a small, crumpled napkin. On it was an address. Maggie's Diner. She works the late shift. The bell on the diner door rang as he walked inside. It was warm and smelled like coffee. A waitress behind the counter looked up and her eyes went wide. It was Elena. She was wearing an old uniform that was too big for her and her hair was messy. He could still see a faint bruise on her cheek. The moment she saw him, her hand started to shake so badly she almost dropped a coffee pot. Mr. Blake, she whispered. You can't be here. Jonathan's heart felt tight. Elena, he said, taking a slow step toward her. I came to say I'm sorry. She quickly looked around at the few other people in the diner. Please don't make a scene, she begged. You already ruined my life once. That's enough. He let out a shaky breath. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. My father, he told me you saved him. And now? Now I know the whole truth. Elena just shook her head, tears in her eyes. The truth doesn't matter for people like me in a house like yours. I don't care about that right now, Jonathan said. I care that I hurt someone who was only trying to help. He paused. I lost everything that night, she said quietly. My job, my home, my name, and why? Because I tried to save an old man's life. Jonathan kneeled down beside her booth. Then let me spend the rest of my life making it right. Elena looked away. You can't fix what you've done. Maybe not, he said. But I can make sure the person who caused all this never hurts anyone again. Victoria is gone. For good. Her eyes snapped back to look at him. Gone? Security walked her out tonight. The police will be talking to her soon. Elena didn't say anything. She just stared at him, her face a mix of relief and disbelief. Then she finally whispered, Why did you come to find me? Jonathan hesitated. Because I have to ask you something, and only you can tell me the answer. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. Why would you risk everything for my father? A man who didn't even know your name sometimes? Elena's eyes softened. Because, she said quietly. He saved my life once. Jonathan stared at her. What are you talking about? She looked out the window at the rain. It's time you knew the secret your father has been hiding his whole life. The diner was empty now. The only sound was the soft rain hitting the windows. Jonathan sat across from Elena, watching her closely. She took a deep breath. Before I worked for your family, I was a cleaner at a hospital. Your father used to come there every single week. He wasn't there for himself. He was there to visit a little boy who was badly hurt in a car crash. Jonathan frowned. A car crash? She nodded. Yes, the news said it was just a bad accident. They said a drunk driver hit another car. 2 people died. Only 1 person lived. But what the news didn't say was that your father was the one driving that car. Jonathan felt his blood run cold. That's impossible. Elena looked down at her hands. He came to the hospital for months. He paid for everything for the families who lost someone. But there was one child. The little boy who lived who had no one left. No family at all. All he had was a scar on his shoulder and very sad eyes. She looked up at Jonathan, her own eyes full of sorrow. That little boy was you. Jonathan couldn't breathe. What? Elena nodded slowly. You were that boy. The orphan. You are the son of the two people your father accidentally killed. He shook his head, confused. No, I'm his son. I have a birth certificate, pictures. They were fakes, she said softly. Your father couldn't live with the guilt of what he did. So he adopted you, gave you his name, and hid the truth from everyone. The real Jonathan Blake Jr. died in that car crash with his parents. The words hit Jonathan like a truck. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. That can't be true. Elena's voice broke. He told me the secret one day a few years ago when his mind was still clear. He said, "If my son ever finds out the truth, tell him I wasn't trying to replace the son I lost. I was trying to make things right." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. His whole life, the money, the big house, his name, it all felt like something he had stolen. So, I was never really his son. You were something more than that, Elena said firmly, though her own voice trembled. You were his second chance. There was a long silence. Jonathan buried his face in his hands. He lived with that secret his whole life, and I'd punished the one person who was trying to protect him. Elena reached across the table and put her hand on his.
He never stopped loving you, Jonathan.
Not for the family you were born into, but for the man you became. Jonathan finally looked up, his eyes wet with tears. I need to take you home, he said quietly. Elena paused, her own tears now falling. Are you sure that's what he would want? Jonathan nodded. No, he said. But it's what we both need. The next morning, Jonathan's car drove slowly through the gates of the big estate. The mansion looked huge and silent in the gray morning light, filled with so many memories. Next to him, Elena sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap. When the car stopped, she didn't move. I don't know if I can go back in there, she whispered, her voice shaking. Jonathan turned to her, and his eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. You walked into this house once to save a man's life, he said gently. Now you're walking in to save what's left of his family. Before they could even reach the giant front doors, they swung open. Henry, the old gardener, was standing there. His eyes went wide when he saw Elena. Miss Carter, he whispered, a huge smile spreading across his face. You're back. Elena managed a small smile. I came to finish the job. Inside, the house smelled of fresh flowers, the kind Edward had always loved. The long hallways were quiet now. There was no more yelling, no more tension, just the soft sound of their footsteps and the ticking of a tall clock. When they got to Edward's room, the old man was awake, sitting up against some pillows. The moment he saw Elena, his eyes lit up. Elena, he said, his voice a weak, cracked whisper. You came back. Elena rushed to his side, her eyes filling with tears. I never really left you, sir. Edward's trembling hand reached out and took hers. You saved me. You saved me twice. Jonathan stepped forward, his own voice shaking. Dad, I know everything now. I know who I really am. Edward gave a small, tired smile. He already knew. You found out? Jonathan nodded, tears running down his cheeks. You should have told me. The old man's lips trembled. I tried to so many times, but every time I looked at you, I saw my biggest mistake and my greatest blessing all at once. I thought if I just loved you enough, it would be okay. Jonathan's voice broke. It was enough, he said, kneeling by the bed and taking his father's other hand. You made everything right. You gave me a home, a name, a chance to be a good person. That's all a son could ever want. Tears filled the old man's eyes. You may not have my blood, Jonathan, but you are my legacy. You are my son. Nearby, Elena wiped her own tears away silently. It felt like, after all the pain, forgiveness had finally entered the room. Jonathan turned to her, his voice clear and strong. You belong here too, Elena. Not as a maid, as family. You always were. Henry, who was standing by the door, nodded. It's about time someone said that out loud. For the first time in many years, the cold, dark house felt warm again. The sadness that had lived in its walls for so long finally started to disappear. Jonathan looked around the room as sunlight began to shine through the curtains. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this house is finally a home." A few weeks later, bright sunlight poured through the windows of the Blake mansion. The air felt light and happy. The sound of birds singing had replaced the old heavy silence. Jonathan stood in the main hall in the exact spot where the whole terrible story began. It was the same floor where he had found his father on his knees, the same spot where he had hit an innocent woman, but today the floor was bright with sunshine, not dark with shadows. Across the hall, hanging in a beautiful glass case, was the rope. It was cleaned and coiled perfectly. It was no longer a symbol of pain, but a reminder of everything they had survived. Underneath it, a small silver plate had words carved into it. "The truth is a rope that sets you free, it doesn't tie you down." Edward sat nearby in his wheelchair with a warm blanket on his lap. His eyes were old, but they were peaceful now. Elena stood next to him, putting fresh flowers in a vase. Jonathan walked over and kneeled beside his father. "Are you comfortable, Dad?" Edward smiled a little. "More than I've been in a long, long time." Jonathan put his hand on his father's. "You know, the truth hurt a lot, but it healed us more than the lies ever could have." Edward looked at him with pride. "I didn't give you my family's blood, son. I gave you my family's name, but you're the one who gave that name meaning." Elena turned, her eyes shining. "And you gave this house its heart back." Jonathan looked up at the rope in the case. "That rope once brought us so much shame," he said quietly. "Now it reminds me that no amount of money or power is more important than being kind." Just then Henry walked in. "Sir, all the staff are waiting outside. They want to take a family picture. They say they haven't seen you all smile together in years." Jonathan smiled. "Then let's give them a picture they'll never forget." Elena pushed Edward's wheelchair and the three of them went out to the front steps. As the cameras flashed, their smiles were real. They weren't smiling for newspapers or for show. They were smiling because they had finally found peace. As the photographer finished, Jonathan looked back at the house one last time, his eyes on the framed rope. His voice was soft but strong. "That rope started as an act of cruelty," he said. "But now it reminds me that even when things are at their darkest, love and truth can still find a way to shine through." If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances, because sometimes the truth that hurts is the one that heals us the most.